Namaste, Kailash ji, and a very warm welcome to thousands of participants who are joining us today from around the world. All of us are here today to learn from each other and to share the roles each of us can play in rebuilding our communities. Kailash ji, you need no introduction. You have been a lifelong champion of children and have dedicated your life to protecting children from abuse and promoting universal education to quality for quality education. Your Nobel Prize in 2014 has only accelerated your efforts. Most of us would agree that to rebuild our communities in a sustainable manner, we must educate and empower the next generation. And there is no better person to talk about the role each of us and our organization can play than Nobel laureate Satyarthi. Many in the audience may not know your work in detail. May I request you to talk about some of the challenges you faced over the years?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So, we all know that education is the key to all progress, growth, successes, equality, justice, and well being in the society. If education is jeopardized or facing some obstacle, then rest of the things will fall apart, and that is a serious problem now. We know that 1.6 billion school-age children are not in school today. These are the latest reports from the United Nations.
Yeah.
And that means 90% of world's school-age children are not in schools due to the long closures and lockdowns and the pandemic. Uh, so the first fear is that in the post-pandemic era, a large percentage of them would not be able to come back to their classes. That we have seen in many of the school closures, like during the Ebola in West Africa and during the strike, teachers' strike in Argentina and many other places that uh, these long closures result in dropout of children from schools. So that is one major area we have to think of. Um, 37 crores, 370 million students in primary classes in the world are depending on school feeding programs or uh, conditional cash transfer programs, and this is directly linked with their school attendance. And since they are not able to attend their schools, that is going to affect them as well as their families, the poor families. So they are in much more serious danger. Uh, we know that about 100 million children who were not in schools, they may not come to school. They cannot join the schools. But those who are in schools, education cannot reach to them so easily. The online education is quite limited in spite of all the technological progress we have made in the world.
Yeah, one of the challenges we see that across the board, the progress we have made in the last 20 or 25 years in children health, in children education, inequality, and injustice is being diluted because of the pandemic, some of the issues you talked about. What is your view about the role governments can play and private organization, ordinary citizens like us can play in at least not losing the progress we have made?
Yeah, yeah. And this is, of course, a big challenge ahead, the entire humanity and particularly the governments. So the governments have to ensure that we have to keep building the confidence of society, the most vulnerable people. We have to ensure that this pandemic crisis will go one day. And in the meantime, children and their families would not be facing hunger and deprivation, and they are not losing their spirit. So that has to be maintained through the media and social media and the government efforts. In addition to it, equally important is, or perhaps more important, is to ensure that the large number of people who are economically affected, uh, they are given some uh, cash support uh, and other kind of support, including food material and other things. Health, of course, is one of them, so that their children can continue to attend online classes if they are having online classes, if they are able to access to. But after a month or two, or after 6 months, when the schools will open, as I said before, that these parents should not lose interest, and the children should not lose interest in going to school because of economic problems and other social problems. We have also seen that uh, the most marginalized sections of society and the children who are in special needs, like these children with disabilities, or what we call the special abilities, uh, children who are in child labor, in prostitution, those who are victims of trafficking, those children should must be given priority in dealing with such issues. If we lose them now, then we are going to lose the entire generation of
Yep.
millions of children, perhaps 100 of million children. 152 million children are working as child laborers in the world, as we know.
Yeah.
And if we are not going to address their issues now with priorities, then there would be serious socio-cultural crisis also. The economic crisis will lead to huge social tensions and ramifications, uh, perhaps violence and other things. So governments have to ensure that how these sections of society must be given priority. And therefore, we have demanded that we means 88 Nobel laureates and some moral leaders jointly demanded that 20% of the pandemic uh, related fund, what they call the emergency fund, or uh, pandemic mitigation fund, or different funds at different levels, 20% of it should go to 20% most marginalized people of the world, 20% poor people of the world. And that is one of the things which we are demanding, and a joint statement and a letter has been sent out to every government, and particularly to the G20 countries. G20 has almost announced $7 trillion fund to fight corona and after this coronavirus situation. So at least 1 trillion of it should be earmarked for poorest 20% people of the world, and children should be in priority.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. We are spending a lot of resources in solving immediate problems arising from the pandemic, but I have always thought about investing in children as an investment. That is going to produce, if we invest $1 billion in our children today, it might give us a return of $10 billion or $10 trillion, over the lifetime of the children.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
so I think we need to think of what we do with our next generation as an investment. The governments, the private citizens, the corporations, we all need to make. I have been mostly in the private sector, and I would like your comments on that. Is that we always say that if we don't educate the next generation, we will not have any workers who can carry our work forward.
Yeah, a skilled workforce is needed. The people who can play a role in good governance and good politics, apart from good businesses, could not be found if we are not able to good quality education for our children. And that quality education should also have some moral and ethical value in it, so that we can create a better society. As far as the investment versus the return is concerned, there are many reports. One report from the World Bank and UNESCO suggested that if we are going to invest $1 on eradication of child labor, the return would be $7. And if we are going to invest $1 in education, that investment will give a return of $15 over the next 20 years. So there is another report which says that if we, in a developing country, if all school-age going children are educated today, then every single year of their education will give a return of 0.34% of GDP growth. If we are able to give education for 10 years to every child in a developing country, then the return would be almost 3.5 to 4% more growth. So there are economic aspects of it, and we cannot lose them. But equally important is that education helps in building better societies.
Better societies, yes. There are both tangible, but you're saying there are both tangible and intangible benefits, and oftentimes intangible benefits are even more valuable than tangible benefits.
Yeah, of course, of course.
Yeah, because we create a more just and more, and all of us can feel good about it every day.
Yeah.
It's we are very fortunate to be in a situation where we have the resources, but we also need the psychological fulfillment that we have done well as our role in society.
Exactly, and that is the reason that international community has agreed upon sustainable development goals. So if we have to create the sustainable societies and sustainable planet, then education is one of the key factors. I would say the key factor. It is a kind of building block to achieve rest of the SDGs. So education must be key. That was the part of Millennium Development Goal, and now the world commitment is to ensure education for all children and good quality education, not the primary education but secondary education. And we need to invest only $22 billion additional money, and that is pre-pandemic estimations. Now I think everything will change. But in pre-pandemic time, the estimations were $22 billion for primary education, additional money is needed. And if we have to ensure education primary and secondary, then altogether $39 to $40 billion additional money is needed. And what is that $40 billion? It is just 7 days of global military expenditure. So it is to think. We have to reflect on us that what kind of progress we are making. Are we made to make bombs and guns and military equipments and fight and wars and violence, or we are going to bring about education and well-being in the lives of the entire humanity? What is our priority? Why can't we invest $20 billion annually to ensure primary and secondary education for children?
And I think, Kailash, some of us have believed that the reason we have wars is because we didn't invest in education and certainly education in morals and ethics 30, 40 years ago. If we had done that, because it would be clear to everybody that wars are not solving any problems.
Of course.
And it's a humanity's moral and ethical failure that we have wars.
Yeah.
It's senseless killing of people does not really do any good. I want to kind of go back and on the issue about what we should do in the education area as well. Even in the US, some of the underprivileged do not have access to resources, do not have access to laptops, and they are suffering badly. And Santa Clara County, for example, we have pushed the school system to provide a free laptop to every child. What can we do on a broader basis? Because maybe that is not the right answer across the world, but it's a problem around the world that they don't have quiet places at home to be able to study. A lot of children don't. And I'm talking from the US perspective, but the problems are, of course, multiplied manyfold if you look around the world. What can we do to really motivate parents to at least create quiet spaces um, for the local governments to provide basic resources so education can continue.
Yeah. So, uh, as we see, the new normals are changing and emerging now. If the new normal for the future is online education, then my recommendation would be that it should have three A's. One is that online education or any kind of education which is driven through technology should be accessible to all,
Yep.
affordable to all, and adorable to all. People should embrace it. They should
Right.
love it. It should not be something which is being imposed on their minds and
Yep.
just flooding with knowledge and information and data and all those kind of things. But people should love it. So, how the information technology, how artificial intelligence and robots and virtual and augmented realities can make education adorable so that people can love through storytelling and some values and some emotions could be injected through it rather than simply passing on knowledge that could be very difficult to concentrate on. But more important is that how we are going to democratize technology, how we are going to democratize knowledge, so that the knowledge should remain in the fewer hands. It should go to the last person of society, and that should be one of the core parameter for the success of knowledge. That how does it reach to the last person, and that requires a very, I would say, honest amount of political will, adequate amount and honest amount of political will to prioritize, to take education and technology to the last persons of society that they can be benefited, the children. So that is something which has to be done, and that means investment in it and prioritizing it. That also means creating an environment where the children uh, can go to school, or if schools are not open during that time, they can still continue their studies in a more appropriate way. So that these things are required, but we cannot simply put every onus on the government and wait and watch that how they are going to do. In different countries, different things are being done. Government of India is doing some good things, but other governments may not be doing, and so on. So it's a mixed situation. But communities should also be sensitized and educated for that. Religious institutions, the religious faith institutions and leaders should also talk about those things. They are selling now yoga and other exercises and breathing. That is good. That is good for health. But we have to think beyond the health, because the mental health and the societal health for the future means a lot. So they can play important role in sensitizing and educating people that please send your children to online classes, or after pandemic keep on sending your
Yeah.
children to schools. So these problems of I would say discrimination or deprivation of education and injustices are not something which is born out of COVID-19. They were already existing. Many of them were existing. So we have to see that how we are going to revisit our priorities as society as whole, but governments and corporate and the technological giants.
Yeah, you talked about the moral and ethical component of education. And, I would say to me that probably as important, maybe more important, if you're all going to be good citizens. What are your thoughts about how we make that happen? I have always believed that the greatest thing my parents did for me was give me values. I think good values. So what can we do to really beyond, let's say, vocational education, give people the moral and ethical authority, let's call it,
Yeah.
to be good citizens?
Well, humanity has always emerged brighter, better, stronger after all crises, even after the world wars. We have
Yes.
learned a lot. And I would underline here that our children are much more resilient than what we think. And they have much more inner power to face the problems. But we should not lose track and they should not lose track. So your question is very pertinent and important, that what we can learn out of the present situation. Some of the things I have been talking about, that this is the right time to feel and inculcate the necessity of togetherness, necessity of interdependent dependentness, mutual responsibility, and we have to learn that no problem in the world can be addressed in isolation. Nobody can solve the problem. No government can solve the problem, including um, uh, mitigating and fighting the effect of pandemic. So we can learn out of it that how to live together, how to learn to live together, and children could be inculcated with that. I would always say that we should not lose our sight from a wealth which is already inside each one of us.
Yeah.
That is the wealth of compassion.
Yeah.
Why I'm saying is that COVID-19 can kill humans. It can kill humans, but it cannot kill the humanity. The
Yeah, you
reason
can't kill our spirit. It will never kill our spirit.
we cannot kill humanity. So we have to revisit that there is an ocean of compassion inside each one of us, and if we can teach our children through our own, practice and our own deeds, that we love others and we care for others as we care for ourselves. So compassion is something which is already inside us. We need not to borrow from outside, and it cannot be preached, but it can definitely be sparked or instigated. So if we start feeling the suffering of others as our own suffering, with a desire and drive to take action to solve that suffering, that value of compassion could be inculcated uh, in our children and the next generation. And education play an important role in it. I've been working along with the Holiness Dalai Lama and many more groups, including in the United States, uh, to bring this value of compassion in curricula and the day-to-day behavior, practical classes, and so on. So we have seen the good results in that. So we can teach such values of compassion through education, and we should not lose the sight. And then we can think of evolving compassionate politics, compassionate economy, compassionate culture, compassionate religions, compassionate society, because we have to learn that if we have to survive, then we cannot survive without other person, without each other.
Yeah, I think it's a very good point you make, is that none of humanity's problem knows political boundaries anymore. Whether it's a pandemic, it's the education, the big migration to Europe a couple of years ago, anything that's happening in India has impacts the whole world, or in China or the US. So we are a global citizen, and we need to understand that whatever happens across the planet is going to impact us.
Yeah.
Yes, a very, very good point. So,
And I have been
but,
saying one
yeah,
thing additionally, and I have been writing this, that while sitting in lockdowns or while sitting in isolation or whatever you call it, keeping ourselves inside homes, we can learn a new value. Each one can learn, and that is creating the supply chain of gratitude. So we are talking about the supply chain of goods which are not produced by child labor or forced labor, or they are produced in friendly environmental conditions and so on. But can we think of creating a supply chain of gratitude? I'm sitting here, there is electricity, there's beautiful roof, there are walls, I'm sitting comfortably here on chair. But this is possible because a large number of people, a full chain of masons, painters, electricians, plumbers, technician, have helped in it. And I'm sitting here because of them. I was able to eat and have a cup of tea or coffee, which was not produced by me. It is not only my cook, but it is the farmer, the workers, the landless agricultural laborer, the ordinary people in the whole supply chain are responsible, and they should be accredited for that, and we have to feel a sense of deeper gratitude for them. So if we learn to build, just to think, that my survival is not because of me alone, it's not because of my money. If I'm a billionaire, it is not because this billion of dollar has been created.
Yeah.
There are so many workers in factories and mines. There are so many people who are helping in management and other things. And if we start feeling the gratitude for them, then we will be able to build a more sustainable and humane society. And that value could be inculcated among the young people and children through education.
And I would say, Kailash, that there has been a rising level of depression, particularly among younger people. And I think the feeling of gratitude almost always makes you feel better. you know it's a it is. And I sometimes meet with children and so on, and my biggest thing is, if you learn forgiveness and gratitude, you will yourself feel better every day.
Yeah. And there are many scientific studies about it, what you said, Narenji, that how it is going to help in our mental health,
Yeah.
and other psychological issues could be addressed. So, if the combination of compassion, gratitude, and the kindness could be put together, then that becomes a full package of living healthy, um, physically and mentally. Because physically, we will feel more protected. When we are trying to help others, then we feel more protected. And that sense of protection is lost, not because of COVID-19, but it has always been there, that the loneliness was increasing, and now the loneliness has become a serious problem, and that is resulting in depression and tensions and anxieties and all kind of mental problems. So if we can simply practice those things, just think that
Yeah.
I'm here because of so many things. How can I help others? Then our whole personality can change.
Absolutely. On this workshop, we have a very large, excellent group of corporate and community leaders from various companies, and they are looking to motivate their organization to do some of the work that needs to be done. What are your thoughts for them? What can they do to really get a bigger movement inside these companies, whether it is Apple or Amazon or Ford? It's across the board, because a lot of us feel a responsibility as corporate citizens to really play a major role in the kind of transformation, Kailash, you are talking about. What can we do?
Um, there was a time when people think that all the development and humanitarian responsibility goes to governments only, but those days are gone. Now, corporate are big player, and as well as the non-profit organizations, and they are well recognized, and they have played important role. So, when it comes to CSR, for example, the CSR should not be only a legal obligation to fulfill, because there are laws in India and in many other countries to fulfill that certain percentage of their profit will go uh, for social or developmental activities. I think that value of corporate social responsibility should become much more deeper, um, while feeling the responsibility to the most marginalized children in the world to protect one full generation. And I always say that if the corporations and the governments together are able to protect one generation, this generation, from all kind of crises and injustices and difficulties and illiteracy, etc., then we are going to protect all generations to come through that generation, because that generation will protect rest of the generations to come, and much of our work is gone in their hands, and they will do it. So in the corporate social responsibility, how we are going to prioritize uh, the vulnerable communities and the marginalized sections of society, and to begin with children. Education is the key. We cannot simply leave it to governments that they are responsible. Education must be provided through CSR. Second thing is that all companies who are dependent on production or supply of products or other kind of businesses which involved, as I said, the large supply chain, then it is also their moral responsibility to make sure that the children must not be engaged as child laborers and forced laborers in their supply chain. Because if 152 million children are working today as child laborers, and the pandemic, I'm afraid, is going to increase that number. Whatever we have earned in all those years is in serious crisis now, because the joblessness of the parents or the death of large number of parents, and the shifting the priorities and the new normals will come, that may result in increase of child labor, slavery, trafficking, prostitution, etc. So in the supply chain, let us make sure that there should not be any child labor. And I would also underline that it is not just the humanitarian or legal obligation, it is an economic obligation also, because each single child laborer is working at the cost of one adult person's job. And that adult person could be the father or mother of that child who is engaged as child laborers. And children are preferred because they are the cheapest source of labor. They are most vulnerable physically and mentally. So if we are going to replace those 150 million child laborers, then those jobs would be fulfilled by 150 million or more jobless adult people. So we have to see that vicious circle of unemployment of adult people and child labor, as well as education. If child labor continues, then the education would be denied definitely. And denial of education will create much more problems. And that becomes again a vicious circle between poverty, child labor, and illiteracy. So companies can ensure that this vicious circle could be broken through their leadership. They are not simply money minting machines. They also have a strong moral responsibility to the entire humanity and the future of humanity. So they have to demonstrate the leadership. And I would say moral leadership. When the moral leadership is in crisis in the global politics, then someone else has to come up. And why not the corporate leadership? They can come up. They are not exploiters. I know many of them personally, and they can show their moral leadership now in ensuring that the things are better.
I think what you're saying is, let's be proactive. Let's go out proactively. We can't say we don't believe in child labor. We got to proactively stop it.
Exactly, proactively stop it. You rightly pointed out that we cannot simply wait and watch, because it becomes the intergenerational poverty, intergenerational exploitation, and intergenerational social discriminations and inequalities and tensions. And the social tensions lead to violence. So if we have to solve these problems, we have to prioritize education. And the child labor is the biggest obstacle in receiving education, and particularly quality education.
Absolutely. So Goodera is transforming volunteering on a global scale and using technology to make that transformation happen. What role do you think the volunteering can play in being role models or perhaps mentors for the next generation?
It's a great idea. I would congratulate Goodera for that. And in fact, my daughter Asmita had worked with them in the past. I think
Okay,
10 years
very
ago.
nice.
So this is a commendable initiative, definitely. And my own experience, if you allow me to share, that during the last 40 years of my work, whatever humbly I was able to do, there was a big strength came from the volunteers. For example, there was no international law against child trafficking, and the hazardous forms of child labor until 1998-99, recent past. So we organized a worldwide march, the Global March Against Child Labor in 1998. It went through three streams and reached out in the United Nations building in Geneva, Palatial Nation in Geneva, with this demand that there should be an international law. 15 million people, and most of them were volunteers. Most of them were students and young people on the streets in 103 countries, marched with us, and no government, no president or prime minister could say no to it when the volunteers and the young children, young people demanded that we need a law. World is not so poor that it cannot take away the guns and tools from their tiny hands and replace them with books and pencils and toys. When this came from millions of volunteers, nobody could say no to it. And finally, within a year, this law has been unanimously adopted. The ILO Convention on the Worst Forms of Child Labor. That time, the number of child laborers officially was about 250 million to 260 million. That has dropped, as I said before, 150 million, 152 million. So 100 million lesser number of child laborers are working today as the result of a massive volunteers mobilization. Our newest effort is 100 million for 100 million campaign. The idea is that 100 million young people are facing multiple forms of violence, slavery, trafficking, refugee crisis, children are moved due to displacement. That displacement can come through conflicts and violence in the countries, but also due to global warming in certain places. So 100 million young people are suffering. But on the other hand, out of almost 3 billion youth in the world, at least 100 million are ready to take up the challenges to make humanity a better place. They are ready to do something, but sometimes they don't find the platform, sometimes they don't find the purpose, sometimes they don't trust. So if anyone is able to create bigger platform and give them the hope that change is not possible, change is inevitable. And one should not look change outside, change is inside us. Leadership is inside us, champion is inside us. That has been my experience with volunteers. So now my new campaign is 100 million for 100 million. So 100 million better off young people should volunteer for 100 million left out brothers and sisters of them. Because these are two diversely growing constituencies. Each one of them need each other, but we have to create that process. So if technology can help, I would love to introduce my people with Good Era who are active in this campaign. We have a full office running from London, 100 million campaign, and that has been able to influence policies in Sweden, in the increase of overseas development support for education in Africa and developing countries. That has helped in pushing for a law in Netherlands, and now we are pushing a law to somehow regulate the companies, supply chain, that no child labor is involved. So that is absolutely done by the volunteers, young volunteers in those respective countries, and that has created a lot of political discussion that European Union should also enact a similar law, which comes essentially from the volunteers. So volunteers have enormous power, and they are ready to take up challenges.
It's great to hear that. And I think technology hopefully can do these things at scale. the beautiful thing about technology is we can bring scale. We can, but what 1 million people are able to do today, we can enable 100 million people to do that tomorrow. And I think, so thank you, Kalashi, for a very enlightening and motivating discussion. Every time I talk with you, I walk away from the feeling that I should be doing a lot more and I should be doing a lot more. All of us can be doing a lot more. So
We're already doing a lot, Narenji, and but this is the time that we should
double down. We should double down right now.
to work together. And you are also a moral leader. I am not exaggerating it. In your own capacity, you are a moral leader. And we have to find all those small or bigger moral leaders in all walks of life so that we can build a strong, loudest moral voice in the world, which is much more needed than ever before. Humanity needs the moral backbone, which is
Totally.
lost in society.
And my own experience, if I read history, is that all major changes have come from bottom up. The government simply implements what people at the lower level really want. All good things that have changed in the world have come from the bottom. I mean, and I think the people, all of us individuals are good people in our heart and can make the change and will make the change. And maybe I'll ask you, as we all go back to our activities and think about how to improve our efforts in volunteering, what are the 3 words we should perhaps keep in our minds that that can maybe a few words that we can keep in our mind. I've always felt that I do a lot of these things because they are good for me. I want to volunteer. I want to be a moral person for mankind because it is good for me. I know it's good for mankind, but it makes me feel good.
Right. So I was thinking that I'm having the conversation with a friend, a brother, and someone whom I can interact with more comfortably. But this question is like a professional journalist. So, so I also try to become professional in it. One is dream. Second one is discover. And the third one is do. These three.
Beautiful word. Beautiful words.
Dream, discover, and do.
Yeah.
Dream big, bigger, biggest. If we have capacity to dream. But those who dream for themselves, they do not build history for good. But those who can dream for others, for the whole humanity, they do it. So dream big, biggest, and dream for everyone. This is 1D. Discover the inner power and discover the opportunities outside. There are so many difficult, so many problems, so many challenges, but there are opportunities outside. We have to discover them. Solutions always lie in the boom of problems. So we have to look for that solution. So discover the solutions from the problems. This is true. Third thing is, if you can discover yourself, you can discover outside opportunities, you can dream big, then what are you waiting for? Do. So dream, discover, and do.
Oh, thank you. What beautiful words to live by. What beautiful words to live by. So thank you very much, Kailash. I maybe I'll add one concluding remark over here is the fact that during this crisis, thousands of global leaders are participating in this workshop, in this seminar, gives me big hope that people around the world care. And I believe, I'm an optimist, perhaps maybe an over-optimist, that, with inspiration from you and from everybody around us, we will make the world a much better place.
Absolutely.
That's really my dream. That's really our dream. That's really the humanity's dream. So thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it, and the message you are spreading is really much needed, particularly in these times.
Thank you. My pleasure and honor. Thank you so much.